So hello and welcome everyone. So I'd like to welcome everyone to today's MGAA market briefing, and really happy to have Xceedance with us today. Looking at, I'm going to have hopefully pronounce this correctly, exponential potential application of AI to the insurance industry. But before we get started on the content, just a little bit of housekeeping. As always, apologies to those people who are frequent visitors to our market briefing and hear this many times. But yes, for the benefit of anyone who hasn't heard this before, just a few do's and don'ts to help us get through the process without any technical hiccups. So please could we ask for cameras and microphones to be turned off, because it just helps us. I think my favourite phrase is it helps us stay with you for the duration of the presentation and not have any technical issues. So that's a request not to, a request to do something. In terms of questions, please add those into the chat facility, and there will be a Q&A at the end. So as and when that question comes to mind, if you pop it in the chat, it will be covered off by our presenters at the end of the session. Ironically, as this is an AI related topic, there is a request, please, to say that if you have, which I don't think I've seen any, if you have activated any AI note-taking tools, please could you deactivate them, as we don't have the relevant permissions. And one last thing in terms of housekeeping is just to remind you that it is being recorded. I think Zoom is very good and tells you that. The benefit of that is that once the session's completed, we'll be able to share a link with you. So if you want to revisit any of the content, if you want to share it with colleagues, it will be there for you to do that. And also a reminder that I'll start again. A reminder that we are accredited by the CII for CPD purposes. So if this meets with your training needs, you can record it on your training log. So enough from me. It's time for me to pass over to our presenters. I'm really happy to have with us Brandon and Gavin, who will introduce themselves in a little bit more detail than that. So I'll hand over to Gavin.
Thank you. Thank you to the MGAA for giving us the opportunity to talk today about AI, and I'm pleased to say I can get some CII CPD points as well, so good for me. So just in terms of my background, Gavin Lillywhite, I'm the operating lead here for Exceedance at EMEA, and I've 31 years industry experience across underwriting and distribution, and I've recently joined Exceedance about 6 months ago, working very closely with Brandon and the team to deliver solutions for clients. So I'll tell you a little bit more about Xceedance in a second, but first off, Brandon, just an intro from yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Gavin. Brandon Nuttall, very, very happy to be here as a guest of the MGAA. So I have 25 years in technology, closing in on 20 in insurance. I joined Xceedance in December of last year as Chief Digital and AI Officer, essentially owning our overall generative AI strategy, approach, and digital IP asset creation. In a previous life, I spent 10 years working in Big Four in a variety of insurance technology delivery roles, as well as Chief Architect for Digital Insurance. And then before that, I worked for Guidewire Software. So back to Gavin.
Thanks, Brandon. So just by way of an intro, you might not have heard of Xceedance, but hopefully you'll know all about us at the end of this, and more people as well. So just by way of background, Xceedance is a global provider of consulting technology, data and analytics, and managed services, specifically for the insurance industry. That's all we do. We're serving insurers, reinsurers, MGAs, brokers, and agents, supporting across multi-functions, including life cycle, underwriting, policy admin, claims, finance, customer service, etc. And one of our most important facets is digital transformation and cloud. And obviously, that's exactly why we'd like to talk to you today about AI and get your thoughts, because we also really want to make this participation from yourselves as well. This is not just a one-way discussion. Really interested in your discussion, in your thoughts. We can tell you about where we think things are going, and we can lean on our expertise that we have. We have about 5,000 employees working for us across 250 clients from North America right across to UK, EMEA, and Asia Pacific. So Brandon's going to talk about the exponential potential of AI, and we hope you enjoy the session. So Brandon, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I guess before I get started, I just want to reemphasize what Gavin is saying. This is designed to be an interactive session. I will probably be speaking for 10 to 15 minutes, kind of centered around some slides we've prepared. But realistically, this is a forum and a venue for you to kind of ask questions of us, and for us to basically download a lot of the knowledge that we've been curating, being in the market for for me, really since November 2022, when ChatGPT really made a giant splash. So feel free to raise your hand, drop questions in the chat, and then Gavin and I will pick those up and we'll address those as we go ahead. So I guess let's go to the next slide, please. I guess I'd like to start by setting the stage. You can go ahead to the next slide. I'm not going to read this slide at you yet. One of the things that I've been thinking a lot about lately is, I'm sure everybody is familiar with the study that has come out recently by MIT that says that 95% of generative AI pilots fail, right? I don't need to explain to the audience kind of what generative AI is, why generative AI is exciting, particularly in our industry. I do think that it is worth spending some time thinking about why is it that organizations across the working world, and especially in BFSI industries, are not seeing the benefit from generative AI that they could or should expect to, right? And I think it comes down to, and what I'll be talking about over the next few slides, is it consistently comes down to not having a good roadmap in place, not thinking deeply enough about where the real benefits are, not thinking deeply enough about where the technology is likely to mature in the future, right? So, when I'm thinking about creating a generative AI strategy and approach, not just for our clients, but also for our own organization, right? Because we have ambitions when it comes to enabling our people with AI. We're thinking about it in a stepwise fashion that takes into account our capability and maturity, the capability and maturity of the organizations that provide generative AI, also the capability and maturity of the regulatory environment, that to understand AI and where AI is going. And then finally, the expectations of the actual end customer, right? Because fundamentally, the reason why we're doing this is because it could or should eventually have an end consumer benefit, whether that is our shareholders, our stakeholders, the people that we directly serve, right? So the way that we are thinking about this when we're thinking about provisioning services and delivering services, we have adopted a framework and a pragmatic roadmap for thinking about generative AI implementation. And so the first part of our conversation today will be about how are we thinking about kind of going down this roadmap? How are we thinking about structuring capabilities? How are we thinking about, how can we create effective pilots and effective capability that's not just a proof of concept flash in the pan that doesn't get out of the lab, right? So I think the construction that we've landed on, and I think a lot of the industry is landing on, is this kind of now, next, and beyond construction, right? In my head, the timeframes that I'm working to in the context of now, next, and beyond, the now capabilities are really the things we should be looking at through the rest of 2025 and into kind of Q1 2026. The next capabilities really take us kind of through the end of 2027. And the beyond capabilities, at least in my head, are taking us kind of through that 2030 timeframe, right? A lot of these timeframes are still very much up in the air. There's a lot of the industry that thinks that it's not 2030, it's 2032. It's not 2030, it's 2028. But the fact of the matter is that the technology is developing in this direction. So regardless as to what the actual date is, this is the future we all need to be planning on living in, right? So what actually is different and distinct about now, next, and beyond? I think there's two kind of fundamental core aspects of that. The first core aspect is, what is the relationship between human intelligence and machine intelligence when it comes to delivering services in your organization, right? So as of right now, and actually over the history of insurance, most of the effort hours in organizations have been delivered by humans. right? Whether that's, humans writing long form on a piece of paper, humans, typing in a typewriter, kind of even, the early efforts in digitization, like particularly in our industry, right? Once you go beyond personal lines, kind of the vast majority of the effort hours in our industry are still serviced by humans. So realistically, what we're going to see as we're thinking about how the impact of generative AI is essentially the number of effective effort hours in your organization being delivered by machines increasing, right? So we're right now in the now space, right? And this is very much in kind of the human machine teaming. And I think a lot of us actually currently operate in this way, right? Where, the machines take on repetitive tasks. This can be, as simple as something like a rule engine, right? That's an effective human machine team. Now, inside the human machine teaming envelope, right? These are things that organizations such as ours can really look to embrace right now. The technology is ready, the regulators, because by and large it doesn't touch customers, are okay with a lot of these things. And I think from a tech perspective, kind of the ease of building and embedding these into existing operations is really the low-hanging fruit. So the concept here is human-machine teaming. How do we make an effective human-machine team? What actually are machines able to bring to the table to make the human experience of doing insurance better, right? So there's a couple of examples here that are worth touching on. I would be surprised if people in this call weren't already doing a lot of these things, but it is worth touching on. I think the first use case that we're implementing a lot for ourselves, and we're seeing a lot of interest in the broader market, are things like as simple as knowledge bots, knowledge chatbots, knowledge management end-to-end, automated drafting of communications, and relatively straightforward video and audio analysis. I think a lot of market participants, particularly when it comes to knowledge, you know, time to proficiency is and has been a challenge. So realistically, anything that looks to reduce that time to proficiency is a plus. Specific to our business, where we get a lot of benefit is, we have a structured process for onboarding a process from one of our customers, one of our clients. That onboarding process generates a lot of documents, right? Whether that's audio recordings, video recordings of meetings, process documentation, rules, all these sorts of things. And in the traditional model, you would dump that into a SharePoint and you would search over the top of it, right? What generative AI allows us to do is to have a much more interactive way of working with that knowledge. And we've seen that that's improved our time to proficiency for new people coming into accounts by 50%. So if we're seeing that sort of result, you can imagine what, an underwriter could see, or, what somebody that is trying to dig through a very, very complex claim could see from this sort of capability. So as we keep going down this road and we have kind of knowledge bots that are able to consume more and more and more knowledge and kind of build a core set of kind of experience and expertise, then we move into a world where we're thinking more about machine coaching rather than human machine teaming. And so in that world, we're going from a place where the machines are doing more or less 20% of the work to now a place where the machines have the capability of doing, about the same amount of work that the humans are doing. So they're generating about 100% of the human effort hours. You're getting a 2x magnification in the number of effort hours you can deliver to your organization. And the key thing that's driving this is that, those knowledge bots have moved from a world where they are passively dispensing knowledge based on a query from a user to more of a role of trust, where you've given them enough knowledge, given them insight, given them enough training such that actually for certain applications, they are potentially more trustworthy to answer a query or to perform a particular action than the human would be. And I'll give you a good example. Imagine an organization where you have a young underwriter, and maybe they work for your organization for 5 years in a particular class of business, and they're really, really good. They consistently apply, good judgment and good wisdom when looking at new inbound cases. But the thing that they don't have is they don't have that experience, right? They don't have the benefit of being able to understand and crunch through 30 years of prior knowledge, whether that be information about your customers, information about, the historical record, prior data that you've captured, prior loss runs, these sorts of things. So being able to have a kind of a coach, someone in your team that happens to be a machine that has the benefit of being able to access that 30 years of data and essentially create coaching opportunities for the human, right? So, maybe the machine coach looks at records and says, oh, hey, your next best action on this case is you might need to refer this to so-and-so because they have specialist knowledge. Or actually, you may need to think about this particular underwriting issue, right? Because, in the past, in past experience, these sorts of things happened, right? And so that's where, the machine is going from having a passive role in that interaction to having a much more balanced role with the human and the machine both having things to offer, okay? So now we kind of go from next, which is kind of in that 2027 timeframe, to beyond. And this is really a natural kind of development and evolution in the way that these capabilities will be evolving. And so again, we're going from a world where, the machine and the human effort hours delivered to the organization are more or less balanced to a world where actually now the machines are delivering progressively more and more and more effort hours in your organization as actual work product. And I think what's interesting about our industry and about BFSI is that we as an organization, we as an industry are specifically constructed around the fact that human errors happen all the time, right? That's the purpose, that's the point of the three-line of defense model, right? So there's a lot of anxiety over the fact that AI makes errors, AI hallucinates, right? I mean, we all know of hallucination risk with AI, but it just so happens that humans hallucinate all the time. Humans think they read something, they don't get it quite right. I might be working on one case over here and misremember something because I didn't context switch fully away from the previous case I was working over here, and I might do something wrong over here, right? So we have the three-line of defense model in place to protect ourselves and protect our customers from exactly that sort of thing happening, right? So actually, more than any other industry, our industries are best equipped, I feel, to deal with the fact that we've got, incredibly productive but fundamentally imperfect AI capabilities coming into force, right? And so really, when we think about the number of effective effort hours coming in, the machines are now delivering more and more and more, and actually the humans are moving from kind of the front office where they're essentially delivering tasks, delivering work items, more into that kind of second line of defense mode where actually, rather than directly doing the work themselves, they're moving into a world where they are managing a team of agents and basically giving quality assurance over top of the team of agents that's doing the actual work, right? I guess with that as context, let's go to the next slide. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to add a couple more dimensions to the slide that you just saw. So this is the same slide. This has got the now, next, beyond implementation time frame. There's two more kind of axes that I've added to this, right? So now the vertical axis is about increasing risk and cost. This is both, this is technical risk. This is also regulatory risk. And then the size of the bubble maps to the economic opportunity that sits inside of each one of these potential use cases. And so I think there's a couple different kind of take-home messages from this, right? The first is, and maybe somewhat unsurprisingly, The big chunky use cases that can deliver a lot of benefit, they're in the future, but they're actually, not actually all that far in the future, right? Ambitious organizations, some of the organizations I speak to are already kind of playing around in that next, right? They've already got some kind of initial capabilities in place, and they're really, really thinking about, okay, so now I'm confident that my knowledge management can do X, Y, Z. Now I'm going to start putting it into a negotiation space, right? And then I think the second take-home message here is that the market also recognizes the fact that the things that are in the beyond space are big chunky benefits, right? So I think that the key thing here is that a lot of the biggest benefits that we can get as an industry from AI require vendor support, right? And the vendors see that too. So for instance, computer use agents, it's the biggest bubble here, right? It's the biggest bubble here because realistically, if you think about the sorts of interactions that we have every day with market participants, we use a computer, unsurprisingly, most of the time. And that interface, that API that we use to access the computer is extremely inefficient and extremely difficult for AI to use. Organizations like OpenAI, they recognize this and they're like, hey, if we can improve the way, if we could teach a generative AI model to use a computer, actually, we don't just unlock one application, we unlock every application, right? So they're investing in that, right? It's important that we as an industry are ready to catch that capability when they're ready to make it available. And building the maturity and the level of assurance that we need to get to that point over the next few years as we build to that end state, I think that's one of the most important things for us to think about as an industry. Next slide. So going all the way back to the way that I opened the last 20 minutes of conversation, 95% of generative AI projects don't get out of pilot, right? I think one of the biggest reasons why they don't get out of pilot is because it is really, really easy to go to ChatGPT and type in some stuff and see it generate some knowledge, see it generate interesting content and say, you know what, I think I could use this, right? It is another thing entirely to take that proof of concept, proof of value, and push that thing to production, right? This isn't like a regular kind of digital transformation proof of concept where, there's a little gap. Maybe there's the analogy I like to use is, it's like crossing a stream, right? So you do a proof of concept, that's fine. Getting to production is just kind of like crossing the stream. Getting a generative AI proof of concept, proof of value to production, given the shifting regulatory sands, given the fact that AI governance already is all over the place, that's more like crossing the Grand Canyon rather than crossing the stream. So the organizations that are succeeding, right, are baking responsible AI development and deployment in on day one, building it up from first principles, right? So I'll give you an example. I was talking to an organization and they were talking about how they've been dabbling into AI, right? And they're saying, they're using Microsoft Copilot over here and they're using Anthropic over here for coding. And they've got a couple of guys that are using Perplexity, right? Very, very common. The consequence of that is that your generative AI is going out to 3 different cloud service providers. There is no possible way for you to provide governance on top of all of that. If you're going off to 3 different cloud service providers, it's impossible for you as an organization to actually understand who is using AI for what purpose and getting what value. So when we're thinking about solving the problem for ourselves and when we're talking to customers and clients about doing that for them, we bake these sorts of things, not just as a governance layer, not just as an audit layer, but we bake these to the greatest extent possible into the technology that we build and deliver. So, for instance, unified governance and monitoring, just to cherry pick one. You know, it is important to think about how do you bake a single source of truth, a single pane of glass for every single piece of AI your organization uses or is responsible for. And then how do you do compliance monitoring, risk monitoring, hallucination, toxicity, all those sorts of things in a very consistent way across all of that AI. How do you actively detect bias? It's interesting. I was doing a personal experiment here, and what I wanted to do is I wanted to determine what AI thought about our industry. So I wrote an article on my Substack, but overall, it thinks of our industry somewhere between cockroaches and smallpox, right? So generative AI, ChatGPT in general, has a very, very, very poor, it doesn't think much of the insurance industry, let's put it that way. And the result of that is actually, when you're asking ChatGPT questions about insurance or regarding insurance, a lot of that negative bias that it has fundamentally about the insurance industry, it can leak into the outputs that you're getting, right? So actually understanding bias, detecting bias, fairness by design, it's critically important to bake in, right? It's critically important to start thinking about those safeguards, not after the proof of concept has been done, but before it's been done. Another good example here is I was doing another experiment where I was thinking about does the AI have bias when it comes to the makes and models of vehicles, right? And I found that DeepSeek keeps trying to assign more liability to Porsche drivers in 50-50 situations, right? Because there's an inherent bias in the language model, which indicates that people who drive Porsches may be worse drivers. So it's these sorts of things that you have to think about and test consistently from first principles so that that path from getting to proof of concept to production is easier. So I think with that, I've been talking for quite some time, and I'm really interested in knowing about your journeys. So Gavin, did you let's pivot to the Q&A.
Okay, I can't actually see any questions in the chat at the moment, so I would actually encourage people to put them in the chat now, and we'll go through those. But firstly, Brandon, thank you for that run through. Very interesting, and obviously you and I work very closely on this in our own organisation. So perhaps just as a kickoff, you talked around sort of, why do so many pilots fail? So 95% tend to fail. Perhaps you could also just expand about a little bit around sort of how to kick this off successfully, and perhaps also touch on the idea of citizen development like we have in our own organisation and ideation, because I think sometimes there's perhaps people in the organisation that think, well, it's not my job, it's someone else's job, whereas we think actually it's everyone's job. So perhaps you could just touch a little bit around that.
Yeah, so you touched on a couple topics there, Gavin. So I guess I'll give you one use case, which is actually very, very personal. So I was working with an organization just recently that had implemented some generative AI to parse accord forms and load those accord forms into another system. And so what comes out of that, actually, when we were doing the benefit tracking of that, was actually the business was starting to complain because they were saying, we're seeing negative 58% efficiency from implementing this. And so we're like why? I mean, we're extracting the data with 98% accuracy. Why are we seeing such a poor efficiency outcome? And so it turned out that the way that they had integrated this into their business process was that the operator was pushing a button, walking off to get coffee, coming back in 5 minutes, and then completing the rest of the task. So a task they were able to do by hand swivel chair integration in about 90 seconds was taking up to 5 minutes, right? Now, it just so happens that, and I think this is a key lesson to address the first part of your question, Gavin. AI is not that special. AI is another piece of kind of digital technology. All of these things fundamentally have root in your business process, your business case, and the way you deliver value to your stakeholders. And so a lot of organizations treat AI as kind of magical fairy pixie dust. And if you just sprinkle it onto a process, that will automatically get better. And that is absolutely not the case. So AI transformation is just like any digital transformation. They start with a clear understanding of the business case, a clear understanding of the business process, a clear understanding as to where you want to take the business, how do you move them through that change, and then actually the change management actively embedding that change in the business along with the AI. Something I commonly say internally, right, is that if I deliver AI change and the results of which is every person in my organization gets an extra hour a day to go have lunch, right, or to go for a walk, right? I haven't actually delivered anything of any benefit, right? So it's all about in terms of how do you materialize the benefit that the technology delivers.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I still can't see any questions, so I'm happy just to continue asking myself. So, but please, everyone, please do put questions in. No silly questions, by the way. Everything is welcome. We really would welcome your inputs and thoughts as well. I'd be very interested. So in my previous life, I used to be a property underwriter, and I very much sort of see AI as being pretty much like you said, that coach or that complementary piece. There's been a lot of talk around, will AI eradicate my job? I personally don't think that will. I think it will just, like you've mentioned, give us more free time to actually focus on more innovation, more quality, etc. But perhaps you could just sort of maybe expand a little bit around sort of how the AI can actually complement sort of let's call it day-to-day underwriting, which might also be very helpful particularly for MGAs that tend to specialize in niche areas.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think specific to the MGA interest, the MGA part of the world. So the thing I like to talk a lot about is that, the world doesn't need 1/10 of the insurance practitioners. The world needs 10 times the insurance, right? Global market penetration for insurance is roughly 6%. There's a lot of room to grow, right? And MGAs really are kind of the engine room for innovation, I think, when it comes to kind of delivering insurance into new markets in different ways, right? So, for instance, there is an emerging need for AI risks insurance. Typical cyber policies don't necessarily cover, a lot of AI risks. And actually, there are very few providers that kind of specifically focus on, delivering kind of AI all risks, AI liability, hallucination liability, these sorts of things. So, one, I think from a people perspective, AI has the capability to unlock those new markets, has the capability to unlock, lower cost to serve models to be able to reach more of those risks that are uninsured. And then two, of course, given that AI has the capability to unlock them, you still fundamentally need human operators, right? Even in that beyond model, looking at 2030 to 2032, there are still human operators in that delivery model, right? So I think that it gives, and I think most people want to step into kind of more knowledge added, more value added tasks. So realistically, that this will give kind of people that are in the insurance industry more opportunities to do so.
Yeah, that's good thought. And my thought on all this is very much that if I think about certainly for large corporate underwriting, if you've got insuring 500 locations, for example, there's absolutely no way you can assess 500 locations. So a competent AI tool can really help you do that in addition to what you do. And as you mentioned earlier, around sort of highlight areas where you might want to pay more attention, look at your reinsurance, your terms and conditions, etc. So thanks, Brandon. So I'm pleased to see we've got some questions coming in. So first question from James. Do you have any examples of successful trials of AI in the industry above and beyond chatbots that seem to be common?
Yeah, so the thing about generative AI and kind of transformer models is that it's not just chat. It has unlocked kind of video capability, audio capability, incredible capability to extract information from documents, right? It's really created a revolution in the way that we think about delivering AI technology kind of across all of these, right? So, there's just ideas that are coming off my head here. The guys at Mistral have released a document data extraction model that is, it scores about, a good 8 percentage points better than the state of the art available for major cloud service providers, right? And so it greatly commoditizes kind of document data extraction capability, right? I know of some personal lines insurers that go out on TikTok and they find videos of cars behaving badly, and they download those videos and they search the videos for reg numbers in the videos, and they use that to create underwriting issues, right, in the back end. Because people who, attend, car stunt days out on the M25 or whatever, you may not want to insure those kinds of people, right? So I think that, as you kind of scratch beneath the surface of your typical chatbots, you tend to find kind of interesting, innovative use cases that aren't flashy, but are incredibly productive in dollars and cents terms. I think the other thing here, and to go back to that MIT study, right, is it found an interesting correlation here. So the use cases that are flashy and demo well, like marketing use cases and sales use cases, actually had the lowest potential value to deliver, right? And it was actually, the back office efficiency in finance, back office efficiency in HR and talent acquisition that really had the most potential to deliver benefit to the organization.
Okay, so filtering out the moral hazard is interesting. Okay, so next question from Karen. Do you see AI impacting the way that MGAs work with their partners, particularly capacity providers and brokers?
So I think the key thing here is that, and I've talked to a lot of insurers and MGAs about this. If you think about kind of the business processes that you run, particularly when it comes to the broker, right? You effectively have an open storefront. People come to the storefront, you advertise, hey, we do X, Y, Z. This is the sort of thing that we want to take on, this kind of business we want to take on, and so on and so forth. I think what's interesting, and I'm reflecting and thinking this is kind of a carrier, but I think that it's an important conversation for this audience as well. I was talking to a carrier, and literally their underwriters are so maxed out that they spend at most 30 minutes per case, and they don't even pretend to write anything that's under $40,000 in premium, right? Because with their current business model, the juice is just not worth the squeeze, right? But then thinking about the potential that AI could bring to the table, right? What could you unlock in organizational value if you use AI to take that lower threshold and say, okay, now we're going to reach down from that 40,000 and we're going to just start writing 15,000 and up. But then that layer between 15,000 and 40,000 in premium, we're going to basically have as much of an AI automated process as possible. We don't want this to touch the sides, right? We want the underwriters to spend, maybe 5 or 6 minutes looking at this case and not 30 minutes. Or how could you change your business model if rather than giving your underwriters 30 minutes to look at each case because they're so maxed out, you automate a lot of things with AI. And actually now they can spend an hour to look at each case because a lot of that time in that 30-minute window was wasted. So, and how could that improve your underwriting quality? How could that improve your bottom line? So those are the sorts of conversations that AI and automation are really unlocking.
So both an efficiency and a growth opportunity,
Yeah.
capital optimization, etc. Yeah.
So what I think I would say as well, right? And this is kind of touching on efficiency versus growth. Fundamentally, people talk a lot about AI as something that can deliver efficiencies. I personally think of it much more as a growth play. I think that one of the hardest conversations to have with an organization is, everybody is really, really excited about, delivering 30% efficiency, right? If I've got 10 underwriters and I deliver 30% efficiency, then what I've done is I've eliminated the demand for 3 underwriters. What am I going to do with those underwriters, right? Either you release the FTE or you grow, right? And as what I was saying before, insurance is so underpenetrated globally. Realistically, you should be using that capacity in your organization to grow. So I see this fundamentally as a growth play.
Yep, no, makes sense. So next question, are you finding some organizations are still resistant to adopting AI, perhaps due to the factors such as bad news stories and it being relatively new and untested?
Yeah, so my this might not land with a lot of you, but my first job back when I was 16 is I worked for Kmart, right? And so you kind of think of it as like a Tesco. And we had under each one of the registers, those old kind of card machines where you put the carbon paper in and you took the little top thing on top and you went clunk, clunk. That was the reason why we all have or had the raised numbers on top of our credit cards, clunk, clunk. Yeah. And, when those things came out, when the credit card was invented, right? The whole process of accepting credit cards was new and untested. And then it became digitized, then it became automated, and then, we don't use anywhere near as much cash as we used in the past, right? So technologies have a way of going new and untested to industry standard. I think that if you came up to the marketplace and said, hey, I want to launch a new credit card company, but I don't want to do electronic clearing at all. I want to bring back the thunk machines. The regulator wouldn't let you. And I think the same thing is happening in our industry right now. So by the same token, I remember 10 years ago, I was implementing, a popular software package, and we were building rule engines. And we had financial transaction validation rules, and we enforced something like 40 or 50 rules in this rule engine. If I turned around and said, oh, hey, I want to delete all of these rules, and I want to do it by hand now, the regulator would say, actually, no, you can't, right? That's bad, that's wrong, that will be unfair, that's much less efficient. So I think we're moving from a world where, yes, there's bad press. Yes, AI hallucinates. That's fine. But we're moving into a world where, past a certain point of development, the machines are going to be so much better at doing certain classes of tasks than humans are, that actually it will become a risk for humans to be sitting in that seat instead of a machine, right? And at that point, if that's 2030 or 2032 or 2034, we know it's coming. So realistically, we need to be thinking and planning now for what we're going to tell the regulator in 2032 if we still have a human in that seat. So whether or not you think your organization is ready to adopt today, I think that our organization is on an AI adoption roadmap, whether we want to be or not, right? And so I think the wise thing is to prepare for that eventuality.
And that's a nice segue to another thought of mine. I mean, if we think about our own organization, as you said, it's from top to bottom, AI is a massive priority and opportunity for us, but it comes from the exec team as well. And to what degree do you think the execs within the other insurance world, be it insurers, reinsurers, brokers, are really sort of aware of the capability? And that also ties into my point around sort of the citizen developer, because it's obviously incumbent on everyone in the organization to sort of feed the hopper of ideation, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So So I've got two comments on that statement. I think the first is that the level of executive buy-in, of course, is very variable. I'm sure everybody on this call is reflecting on the reality of their existing organization. And, there are some senior executives that are, very, very gung-ho, that may themselves fall into the, AI is magical pixie fairy dust trap. Other industry executives are, they disbelieve, they can't imagine, insurance being anything other than, people swapping slips out of, slip cases over a 3 martini lunch in the bottom of Lloyd's, right? And then all the while in the background, you've got, CIOs and CTOs kind of holding on for dear life, right? So what's an organization to do? And I think thinking about that in the context of what I'm doing kind of for and with Xceedance, again, going back to responsible AI principles, it's about building that up from first principles, because we know that AI is going to change our delivery model. Understanding exactly how it's going to change our delivery model in 2030, it's really, really difficult. I don't have a working crystal ball. But what I do know is that, the FCA is going to be, highly interested and incentivized in exactly what I'm doing in 2030 once we get there, right? So there are low regret, no regret things we can work on now, right? Whether that's governance, whether that's, risk, command and control, delivering safe capabilities to our people so they don't do ChatGPT from their phones. All these sorts of things are very low regret, no regret activity while we actively manage those internal stakeholders into a place where they understand better how to unlock the value. And then going back to the citizen developer thing, I think this is super important. So we as Xceedance, we know that the people that have the greatest capacity and capability to change our industry are the people that we have in the field working with clients every day, right? And we know that if we had to go out and hire AI engineers to do every scrap of AI that we do across the organization, we couldn't possibly hire enough AI engineers. They don't exist. And if they did exist, we wouldn't be able to hire them because Google would have them and Meta would have them, right? So what we are investing in and what we would advise you to be thinking seriously about is, how do I turn the people that have the real domain knowledge in our organization into AI practitioners? And that can come in several forms. That can come by giving them, a safe, compliant version of a private ChatGPT. It can come from, giving them AI-enabled automation tools that they can use in a low-code, no-code kind of way to be able to organically build their own automation, right? It can even come by finding safe, compliant ways to give your engineers access to LLMs, right? So that they can build their own digital solutions. So there's lots of different ways to think about it, but I think it's about kind of unlocking the capacity and capability of your own people to build and deliver AI. And that's what organizations that are succeeding are thinking about and doing. And that's certainly what we're doing as well internally.
Yeah, thank you. So next question, what one use of AI would you say makes the biggest difference to your day-to-day activities? Something we all might be able to try out to see the benefits of AI.
Yeah.
So maybe AI for beginners.
AI for beginners. So my best use of AI, and this isn't necessarily a beginner use case, but this is something that I personally get a lot of value from. So my team for doing AI product and platform engineering sits physically out in India. So I wake up, I get my kids out to school, I sit down in front of my computer, I turn everything on, open up Outlook, and I have just pages and pages and pages of email that I'm literally never going to read, right? And so, but as a leader, I need to be able to understand and manage all the sorts of communication. So one of the personal things that I have that I've unlocked a lot of personal productivity with is leverage generative AI to not just pre-screen inbound emails, but also to go ahead and automatically draft responses to emails that Brandon thinks should demand responses. So the idea being, when I get to sit down, when I actually sit down and start to manage my communications for the day, right? The AI has done a lot of the work for me already, but also using my voice, right? And the key thing about that is that these little productivity unlocks every day, these are commercial off-the-shelf applications of AI. This is not futuristic stuff. This is the now. This is something you can accomplish with any LLM subscription and a little bit of automation tool like Power Automate or N8N in a week, right? But, aggregated across your organization, you will save months of time, right? And just these little unlocks and finding these little unlocks, applying AI and finding these and applying them consistently throughout your day, don't think about 10xing your organization, think about 10xing yourself, right? And these are the things that can accomplish that.
Oh, that's a great point. Great point. So perhaps we could just, before we close up, we could just ask the audience who's already using ChatGPT as part of their day-to-day business. Maybe put it in the comments and or give us a reaction, thumbs up if you are, for example. Just try to get an idea of current adoption already within the MGAA community. We're very interested to see that.
I think my reflection on that, as people are commenting in the chat, is that there's another great stat kind of alongside that 95% of generative AI pilots fail. It's actually 90% of all generative AI use in BFSI organizations is shadow IT. And what I mean by that is so many people are picking up their phones and taking pictures of computer screens and asking ChatGPT to solve their problem, right? And, as an IT leader, it is so hard to stop, right? I have gotten emails, and it's obvious that they've copied and pasted out of Gemini because Gemini uses a very, very specific font that's not your default font in Outlook. And so I open up this email, and it is in the Gemini font, and I'm like, I know exactly how you made that. But also, it wasn't bad, right? It was good. So I can't criticize it. So that's the other thing, right? I don't think that we need to feel guilty at this point for saying, I use AI every day because there's only one of me and there's about 3 of me worth of work in my organization, right? I think as a technology leader, we need to think about how do we make the actual fact that our people are already using AI, right, every single day. How do we make that safe and compliant? Because I know it's happening, it's happening. The regulator knows that it's happening. The fact that nobody's really gotten in trouble yet is immaterial.
Well, I mean, this is an interesting point that I always think about from an HR issue. You can control your own systems and your own computer equipment as an organization, an enterprise, but you don't know what people, as you say, are copying through their phones, their personal phones, sensitive data that's going through there. So that's a much more difficult issue to struggle to manage. So interestingly, there were very few comments. One comment from the MGAA team admitted to using ChatGPT. Maybe everyone's just being a little bit shy, I don't know, or maybe they just don't want to be seen on a recorded screen. They're already using it. But look, Brandon, it's been really good of you to sort of walk us through what you think of the next few years of Gen AI. Personally, I think if I was underwriting again, if I had my time again, I'd be very, very grateful for this kind of technology to really make my underwriting more targeted, whether it's understanding technologies, specific machinery, plant, etc. Would be fantastic. So thank you on behalf of the audience for your session today, and also thank you to the audience for listening to us. Very helpful for us to get our message across. I'm very pleased to do so, and thank you to the MGAA for the opportunity to give us the audience. So back to the MGAA team.
Thank you very much. And yeah, I would just seem to be going a bit over the top with the thank you. So yes, I want to obviously say thank you to Gavin and Brandon for that really insightful session. And I shall probably have to consider popping my introduction housekeeping into an unnamed AI system and seeing if it can come up with a better version, so that people can come up with a different one for every day of the week. So
Sure.
yes, I think we've got lots of thank yous coming through, but we've exhausted all the questions. So I think that leads me to my final thank you and goodbye, and thank you to everyone. And just one final request, that there will be a link for feedback when I send over the recording. So if you could feedback, that would be amazing. So I think on that point, I'll leave everyone to enjoy their afternoon exploring what AI can do for them.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.